What would you do if you discovered your millionaire husband was planning to destroy you financially while you were 8 months pregnant with his child? Rebecca Sterling thought she was living the perfect life in an exclusive neighborhood until a baby monitor revealed a conversation that would change everything. Her husband, Jonathan, wasn't just having an affair with the beautiful neighbor across the street. He was systematically planning her financial ruin, discussing how her pregnancy made her the perfect target, and his mistress was suggesting ways to make Rebecca's problems disappear permanently during childbirth. But Jonathan made one crucial mistake. He underestimated the power of women supporting women because their elderly HOA president had been watching, recording, and documenting everything with surveillance equipment that would make the FBI jealous. What happens when a narcissistic millionaire discovers his pregnant wife has 22 million reasons to smile? When his own mistress turns against him with evidence that could destroy his empire? And when an entire neighborhood rallies behind the woman he tried to manipulate and control? This is the story of how one woman transformed devastating betrayal into ultimate victory, proving that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the beginning of your best life. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why Rebecca Sterling's divorce settlement made headlines, why her ex-husband's IPO failed spectacularly, and how she built a multi-million-dollar business from the ashes of her broken marriage. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this incredible woman turned the tables on everyone who underestimated her. The pregnancy test clattered to the marble floor as Rebecca Sterling heard her husband's voice through the baby monitor upstairs. 8 months pregnant, and her world was about to shatter in ways she never imagined. "I can't wait much longer." Jonathan's voice drifted down through the white plastic device meant to prepare for their coming baby. "She's getting suspicious." Rebecca pressed her hand against her swollen belly, feeling their daughter kick as if sensing her mother's sudden panic. The voice responding to her millionaire ex-husband wasn't hers. It was sultry, younger, unfamiliar. "Just a few more weeks, darling. Once the baby comes, everything will be different." The baby monitor crackled with intimate laughter that made Rebecca's blood run cold. She stood frozen in their pristine kitchen, surrounded by granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that suddenly felt like a mausoleum of her marriage. 8 months pregnant, 8 months of morning sickness, swollen ankles, and excited planning for their first child together. 8 months of Jonathan working late, traveling for business, and acting increasingly distant. Now she understood why. The front doorbell rang, jolting her from her nightmare. Rebecca wiped tears she didn't realize had fallen and waddled to the door, her hand instinctively smoothing her maternity dress. Through the peephole, she saw Dorothy Hartwell, their elderly neighbor and president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. "Good morning, and honey," Dorothy said when Rebecca opened the door. The 70-something woman clutched a manila folder against her floral blouse, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, but we need to talk about some unusual activity in the neighborhood." Rebecca forced a smile, though her heart still hammered from the baby monitor revelation. "Of course, Mrs. Hartwell, come in." Dorothy stepped into the foyer, her sharp blue eyes immediately taking inventory of everything around her. Rebecca had always thought the older woman was overly concerned with neighborhood affairs, but now she seemed like a lifeline. "How are you feeling, dear? You look a bit pale." "Just tired," Rebecca lied, gesturing toward the living room. "Pregnancy hormones, you know." Dorothy settled onto the cream-colored sofa, still clutching her folder. "Actually, that's partly why I'm here. I've been monitoring some concerning patterns in our neighborhood, and I felt you should be aware." "Monitoring?" Rebecca lowered herself carefully into the opposite chair, her mind still reeling from what she'd overheard. "Security cameras. Dear, I have them positioned throughout my property for safety reasons. Sometimes they capture more than intended." Dorothy's expression grew serious. "Have you noticed your husband working unusual hours lately?" Rebecca's breath caught. "He's been busy with the company's IPO preparation." "I'm sure he has." Dorothy opened her folder and pulled out several photographs. "These were taken over the past 3 months. I debated whether to show you, especially in your condition, but women need to protect themselves." The first photograph showed Jonathan's black Tesla in their circular driveway at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Nothing unusual about that. The second showed the same car parked in front of the house across the street at midnight. The third showed Jonathan walking up the front steps of that same house, carrying what looked like flowers. "That's Melody Blackwood's house," Dorothy explained quietly. "She moved in 3 months ago. Interior designer, recently divorced. Very beautiful." Rebecca stared at the photographs, her pregnancy hormones amplifying every emotion until she felt like she might vomit. "There could be an explanation." "There could be," Dorothy agreed. "But there are 12 more photos just like these, taken on different nights over the past 3 months. The baby monitor upstairs crackled again with Jonathan's voice. "I have to go. She's probably wondering where I am." Dorothy's eyes widened as she heard it too. "Oh, honey." Rebecca stood abruptly, her hand pressed against her lower back. "I need some air." "Of course." Dorothy gathered her photos quickly. "Rebecca, I want you to know that if you need anything, anything at all, I'm right across the street. I raised 3 daughters of my own, and I know what it's like when the world feels like it's falling apart." After Dorothy left, Rebecca climbed the stairs slowly, her mind racing with possibilities and denials. She found Jonathan in his home office, dressed in his usual expensive suit, hair perfectly styled, typing on his laptop as if nothing had happened. "Morning, babe," he said without looking up. "How are you feeling?" "Fine." Rebecca studied his face, searching for signs of guilt or deception. "Who were you talking to earlier?" "Conference call with the team in Singapore. Time zones. You know." He finally looked at her, his handsome features arranged in the same confident expression that had first attracted her 6 years ago. "You look tired. Maybe you should rest today." "Maybe I should." Rebecca turned to leave, then paused. "Jonathan, do you know anything about our new neighbor Melody Blackwood?" Something flickered across his face so quickly she almost missed it. "Never heard of her. Why, Mrs. Hartwell mentioned her. Interior designer, I think." "Honey, you know I don't pay attention to neighborhood gossip." He returned to his laptop, dismissing her concerns with practiced ease. "I've got meetings all day, then dinner with investors tonight. Don't wait up." Rebecca nodded and left the room, her heart heavy with the weight of new knowledge. As she passed the nursery they'd spent weeks preparing, she placed both hands on her belly and whispered to their unborn daughter, "It's going to be okay, little one. Mommy's going to figure this out." But as she stood surrounded by pink paint and carefully assembled furniture, Rebecca realized she had no idea how to figure anything out. She'd spent the past 6 years being the perfect wife to a successful man, supporting his career while putting her own marketing background on hold. Now, 8 months pregnant and facing the possibility of betrayal, she felt utterly unprepared for the storm that was coming. Outside her window, she could see Dorothy Hartwell's house across the street, with its obvious security cameras and perfectly maintained garden. For the first time in months, Rebecca felt like someone was looking out for her. The baby monitor crackled one more time with distant laughter, and Rebecca finally understood that her perfect life was about to become perfectly complicated. 3 days after Dorothy's visit, Rebecca found herself standing at her kitchen window at 7 a.m., watching the Blackwood house across the street. Melody emerged in yoga pants and a sports bra that showcased her perfect figure, jogging toward the neighborhood trail with the kind of energy that made Rebecca acutely aware of her own swollen ankles and exhaustion. "Honey, you're up early." Jonathan appeared behind her, straightening his tie. His reflection in the window looked guilty, though Rebecca wondered if she was imagining things. "Couldn't sleep." She turned to face him, noticing how his expensive cologne couldn't quite mask an unfamiliar scent. Something floral and feminine. "Your shirt smells like perfume." Jonathan glanced down at his white dress shirt, then back at her with practiced confusion. "Probably from the dry cleaner. They use different detergents now." He kissed her forehead quickly. "I'll be late tonight. Board meeting followed by drinks with potential investors." After he left, Rebecca found herself staring at his coffee cup, still warm on the counter. 3 months ago, she wouldn't have questioned anything. 3 months ago, she trusted her millionaire ex-husband completely. Now, every interaction felt like a performance. The doorbell rang at 9 a.m. sharp. Dorothy stood on the porch holding a casserole dish and wearing a determined expression. "I thought you might need some proper food," Dorothy said, pushing past Rebecca into the kitchen. "And we need to discuss the evidence." Evidence! Dorothy set the casserole on the counter and pulled out her phone. I've been documenting everything since I first noticed the pattern. Times, dates, vehicle movements, duration of visits. She scrolled through dozens of photos and videos, each time stamped and labeled with meticulous care. Rebecca saw Jonathan's Tesla appearing at Melody's house at various times: 11 p.m. on Monday, 9:30 p.m. on Wednesday, even 2 p.m. on a Thursday when Rebecca had been at her doctor's appointment. Mrs. Hartwell, this is very thorough, but why are you doing this? Dorothy's expression softened. Because 43 years ago, my Harold was having an affair with our neighbor, and nobody told me. I wasted 2 years of my life wondering why he was acting strange, blaming myself, thinking I was going crazy. When I finally discovered the truth, she was pregnant with his child. Rebecca sank onto a kitchen stool, the weight of Dorothy's revelation hitting her like a physical blow. What did you do? I divorced him, raised my 3 girls alone, and vowed never to let another woman go through what I experienced if I could prevent it. Dorothy's blue eyes flashed with determination. Knowledge is power, honey, especially when you're dealing with narcissistic abuse. Narcissistic abuse. The term felt foreign in Rebecca's mouth. Men who manipulate reality to serve their needs. They make you question your own perceptions, make you feel crazy for noticing inconsistencies. Dorothy sat across from her. How often does Jonathan make you feel like you're overreacting or being paranoid? Rebecca considered this. Frequently, she admitted, especially lately. That's not pregnancy hormones. Dear, that's gaslighting. The baby kicked hard against Rebecca's ribs, as if responding to the tension in the room. She rubbed the spot absently while Dorothy continued scrolling through her documentation. I have something else to show you, but I want you to be prepared. Dorothy pulled up a video file. This was recorded 2 nights ago at 11:15 p.m. The screen showed Melody's front door in night vision green. Jonathan appeared, carrying what looked like a bottle of wine and flowers. Melody opened the door wearing a silk robe, immediately pulling him into an intimate embrace that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Rebecca watched her husband of 6 years kiss another woman with the same passion he'd once reserved for her. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, sharp and deep in her chest. I'm sorry you had to see that, Dorothy said gently. But women need to know the truth about their situations before making decisions about their futures. How long have you been watching him? Since Melody moved in 3 months ago. Initially, I was just monitoring general neighborhood activity for HOA purposes. But when I noticed the pattern of late-night visits, I started paying closer attention. Rebecca stood slowly, her hand pressed against her lower back where pregnancy hormones had loosened her ligaments. What am I supposed to do with this information? That's entirely up to you, honey, but I suggest you document everything. Protect your financial interests, and consider consulting with a divorce attorney who specializes in high-net-worth cases. The word divorce hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Rebecca had never imagined her marriage ending, especially not while carrying their first child together. I need to think about this. Of course you do. Dorothy stood and collected her phone. But while you're thinking, I want you to know that you have options. You're not trapped, even though it might feel that way. After Dorothy left, Rebecca spent the day moving through her house like a ghost, seeing everything differently. The expensive artwork Jonathan had chosen, the designer furniture that matched his aesthetic perfectly, the smart home technology that monitored their every movement. When had she stopped having opinions about her own living space that evening? She prepared dinner for 2, even though Jonathan had said he'd be late. She needed the normalcy of routine while her world tilted off its axis. Jonathan arrived at 9:30, loosening his tie as he walked into the kitchen. Sorry, babe. Meeting ran long. He kissed her cheek, and she caught that same floral perfume scent again. You didn't need to wait up. I wanted to. Rebecca watched him serve himself from the pot she'd kept warm. How did the investor meeting go? Really well. We're looking at a valuation that could make us both very wealthy. He smiled at her, the same charming expression that had won her heart years ago. Once the baby comes and things settle down, maybe we can travel more. Europe, maybe Asia. Rebecca nodded, wondering if we included Melody Blackwood in his future plans. The uncertainty was killing her slowly, but Dorothy's words echoed in her mind. Knowledge is power. Jonathan, I met our new neighbor today, Melody Blackwood. She seems nice. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Oh, she mentioned that she's an interior designer. Maybe we should consider having her look at the nursery. Get a professional opinion. I think the nursery looks perfect as is. Jonathan's voice carried a slight edge. Besides, we don't know anything about her work quality. You're probably right. Rebecca took a sip of water, noting how quickly he'd shut down any mention of Melody. Mrs. Hartwell mentioned that Melody works with a lot of wealthy clients in the area. Rebecca, I really don't want to spend our evening discussing neighborhood gossip. Jonathan set down his fork with more force than necessary. I've had a long day, and frankly, this kind of talk isn't good for you or the baby. There it was. The dismissal. The subtle suggestion that her concerns were somehow harmful or inappropriate. Dorothy had called it gaslighting, and Rebecca was beginning to understand what that meant. You're right, she said quietly. I'm sorry. Jonathan's expression immediately softened. The practiced transformation of a man who knew exactly how to manipulate emotions. Don't apologize, honey. I just worry about you getting stressed during such an important time. That night, as Jonathan slept beside her, Rebecca stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything she'd learned. Her millionaire ex-husband was having an affair. A woman she'd never met was documenting evidence to protect her. Her entire life was apparently built on lies and manipulation, but as their daughter kicked against her ribs in the darkness, Rebecca realized that this betrayal might actually be the beginning of her financial independence rather than the end of her security. For the first time in months, she began to plan instead of just react. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start taking control of her own story. Rebecca spent the next morning researching divorce attorneys while Jonathan attended what he claimed was a crucial board meeting. Her laptop screen displayed profiles of lawyers who specialized in high-net-worth divorces, each with testimonials from women who had successfully protected their interests during marriage dissolution. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was using the expensive MacBook Jonathan had bought her for her birthday to investigate ending their marriage. At noon, her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw Melody Blackwood standing on her porch, holding a covered dish and wearing a sympathetic smile that made Rebecca's skin crawl. Hi there, Melody said when Rebecca opened the door. I'm Melody, from across the street. I brought you some homemade cookies. Up close, Melody was even more stunning than her surveillance photos suggested. Auburn hair, green eyes, and the kind of figure that made Rebecca acutely aware of her own swollen appearance. She looked like everything Rebecca used to be before pregnancy hormones and exhaustion took their toll. How thoughtful. Rebecca managed. Please, come in. Melody stepped into the foyer, her eyes immediately cataloging the expensive details of the Sterling home. Your place is gorgeous. I love what you've done with the color palette. Thank you. Rebecca led her to the living room, noting how Melody's gaze lingered on family photos that prominently featured Jonathan. I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced. I know how isolating it can feel when you're expecting. Melody settled onto the sofa with practiced grace. When are you due? 4 weeks. Rebecca lowered herself carefully into the opposite chair. It's our first. How exciting. Your husband must be thrilled. The way Melody said husband made Rebecca's skin prickle with awareness. There was something possessive in her tone, as if she were testing how Rebecca would respond to the word. He's very busy with work right now, but yes, he's excited. I can imagine. I've heard Jonathan Sterling is quite successful. Tech industry. Right. Rebecca's blood chilled. She had never mentioned Jonathan's name or profession, yet Melody knew exactly who her husband was and what he did for a living. You seem to know a lot about my husband, Rebecca said carefully. Melody's perfect smile faltered for just a moment. Oh, you know how neighborhoods are? People talk. She recovered quickly, smoothing her hair behind one ear. I'm actually an interior designer, so I tend to notice successful people who might need my services. I see. Rebecca studied Melody's face, searching for signs of guilt or deception. Have you met Jonathan personally? Briefly, in passing. He seems charming. The understatement of the century? Rebecca thought grimly. He is that. Melody leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, I hope you don't mind some friendly advice from someone who's been through a difficult divorce recently. What kind of advice? Just that men can be unpredictable during major life transitions like pregnancy. Sometimes they act out in ways that have nothing to do with their wives. Melody's green eyes sparkled with false sympathy. If you ever notice anything concerning, don't blame yourself. Men like Jonathan have options that regular husbands don't. Rebecca felt like she'd been slapped. Melody was actually sitting in her living room, giving her advice about her own husband's infidelity while pretending to be a concerned neighbor. "That's very thoughtful of you to worry about my marriage," Rebecca said with forced politeness. "But Jonathan and I are very happy together." "Of course you are." Melody stood gracefully. "I should let you rest. Pregnancy can be so exhausting." After Melody left, Rebecca stood in her foyer holding the plate of cookies and shaking with fury. The audacity was breathtaking. Her husband's mistress had just visited her home, offering fake sympathy while gathering intelligence about their relationship dynamics. She called Dorothy immediately. "She was here," Rebecca said without preamble when Dorothy answered. "Melody Blackwood was just in my living room, pretending to be a concerned neighbor." "Oh, honey, how are you feeling?" "Like I want to throw something expensive at the wall." Rebecca sank onto her sofa, still clutching the cookie plate. "She knew Jonathan's name and profession before I told her. She gave me advice about how men act during pregnancy. The woman is sleeping with my husband, and she had the nerve to counsel me about marriage. That's a special kind of cruelty." Dorothy agreed. "What did you tell her?" "That we're very happy together. I wasn't about to let her know that I know about the affair." "Good thinking. Knowledge is power, but only if your opponents don't know you have it." Rebecca set the cookies on her coffee table and studied them suspiciously. "Dorothy, what kind of person brings baked goods to the woman she's betraying? The kind who enjoys psychological manipulation? Some people get off on the power of deceiving someone to their face." That afternoon, and Rebecca conducted her own surveillance mission. She positioned herself in the upstairs nursery with a clear view of Melody's house and waited. At 4 p.m., Jonathan's Tesla appeared in Melody's driveway. Rebecca watched her husband walk up to the front door with the confident stride of a man who belonged there. Melody answered wearing a red dress that hugged her curves perfectly. She pulled Jonathan inside with an urgency that spoke of established intimacy. For 45 minutes, Rebecca sat in their baby's future room, watching the house where her husband was betraying their marriage. The nursery around her suddenly felt like a monument to naivety. Pink walls, carefully assembled crib, stuffed animals arranged with love and anticipation for a family that was already broken. When Jonathan finally emerged, Melody followed him onto the porch in a silk robe, kissing him goodbye with the kind of passion Rebecca hadn't experienced in months. Then Melody waved at him from her doorway, like a devoted girlfriend seeing off her lover. Rebecca's pregnancy hormones amplified every emotion until she felt like she might explode with rage and grief. She pressed both hands against her belly, trying to calm their daughter who was kicking frantically in response to her elevated heart rate. "It's okay, baby girl," she whispered. "Mommy's going to fix this." Jonathan arrived home at 6:30, acting exactly like a man who had just spent the afternoon in board meetings. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing her forehead with lips that had been on another woman 2 hours earlier. "Quiet. Our neighbor Melody dropped by with cookies." Jonathan's entire body tensed. "Melody, the interior designer from across the street, she seems to know quite a lot about you." Rebecca watched his face carefully. "She mentioned that you two had met briefly in passing." "I don't recall meeting any neighbors recently." Jonathan's voice carried a slight tremor. "What did she want?" "Just being friendly, I suppose. She offered some advice about how men can act unpredictably during pregnancy." Rebecca smiled innocently. "She said men like you have options that regular husbands don't." Jonathan's face went pale. "That's an odd thing for a stranger to say." "I thought so too." Rebecca continued watching him, noting how his hands shook slightly as he loosened his tie. "She mentioned going through a difficult divorce recently. Maybe that's why she's so concerned about other people's marriages." "Rebecca, I don't want you getting involved in neighborhood drama. It's not good for you or the baby." There it was again, the dismissal disguised as concern for her well-being. But this time, Rebecca had evidence of exactly where he'd been that afternoon, and his gaslighting attempts felt pathetic rather than convincing. You're probably right, she agreed. I should focus on preparing for our daughter's arrival. Jonathan's relief was visible. Exactly. We have so much to look forward to as a family. That night, as Jonathan showered off his guilty afternoon, Rebecca called Grace Mitchell, her best friend from college who had become a successful divorce attorney specializing in high-asset cases. Grace, it's Rebecca. I need to ask you something hypothetically. Hypothetically, I'm listening. If a woman discovered her millionaire ex-husband was having an affair while she was 8 months pregnant, what would be her best strategy for protecting herself financially? Grace's voice sharpened with professional interest. Hypothetically, she would need to document everything, secure evidence of marital assets, and file for divorce immediately to prevent asset hiding. How hypothetical are we talking here? Rebecca, not very hypothetical at all. Then you need to come see me tomorrow and bring any evidence you've already gathered. As Rebecca hung up the phone, she realized that her perfect life was officially over. But for the first time in months, she felt like she was taking control of her own future, rather than simply reacting to her husband's betrayals. Tomorrow, she would begin building her case for financial independence and a new life without narcissistic abuse. Tonight, she would sleep beside her cheating husband one last time as a naive wife. Starting tomorrow, she would be a woman with a plan. Rebecca woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of her husband's phone buzzing insistently on his nightstand. Jonathan mumbled something in his sleep and rolled over, but the texts kept coming in rapid succession. Unable to fall back asleep, Rebecca carefully eased herself out of bed and padded to the nursery where she could think clearly. The room that had once represented hope now felt like a sanctuary where she could process the evidence mounting against her marriage. She settled into the rocking chair they'd chosen for middle-of-the-night feedings and tried to organize her thoughts. Tomorrow she would meet with Grace Mitchell about divorce proceedings. She had photographs from Dorothy documenting the affair timeline. She had witnessed Jonathan's lies firsthand. But as she sat in the darkness, Rebecca realized she needed more than circumstantial evidence. She needed something undeniable. At 7 a.m., Dorothy called with urgent excitement in her voice. "Honey, can you come over immediately? I have something you need to hear." Rebecca found Dorothy in her kitchen, surrounded by multiple computer monitors and audio equipment that looked more sophisticated than anything Rebecca had seen outside of television shows. "Dorothy, what is all this?" "Security system," Dorothy explained matter-of-factly. "Video surveillance, motion sensors, and directional audio recording capabilities. I've been monitoring unusual activity patterns for months." She gestured to one of the screens showing a clear view of Melody's front porch. "Last night at 11:30 p.m., your husband visited Miss Blackwood. They spent considerable time on her front porch discussing what sounded like personal matters." Dorothy clicked play on an audio file, and suddenly Jonathan's voice filled the room with crystal clarity. "She's getting suspicious. Yesterday she mentioned that you dropped by the house." Melody's response was equally clear. "I had to see what I was dealing with. She's exactly what I expected. Pregnant, exhausted, completely dependent on you financially." "Rebecca's not stupid. Melody, she's just focused on the baby right now, which makes this the perfect time to be careless. Once that baby arrives, she'll be too sleep-deprived and overwhelmed to notice anything." Rebecca pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a gasp. Her millionaire ex-husband and his mistress were discussing her like she was an obstacle to be managed rather than a human being with feelings. Jonathan's voice continued. "The IPO should be finalized within 6 weeks. Once that money hits our accounts, I can start making moves toward a divorce settlement that protects the majority of assets." "How much are we talking about?" Melody asked. "Conservatively, $50 million in stock options alone, plus the existing company valuation and personal assets. If I file first and control the narrative, I can minimize what she's entitled to receive." Rebecca felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. While she'd been preparing for their daughter's birth, Jonathan had been strategizing how to divorce her in a way that would leave her financially vulnerable. "What about custody?" Melody's voice carried genuine concern. "Shared at most, but I'll push for minimal involvement. Rebecca will be so focused on the baby that she won't fight too hard for my time." Dorothy paused the recording and studied Rebecca's face with compassion. "There's more. Honey, do you want to hear it?" Rebecca nodded. though she felt like she might vomit from the combination of pregnancy hormones and emotional devastation. Dorothy resumed the audio. Jonathan's voice filled the room again, but now he sounded more intimate, almost tender. Once the divorce is final, we can be together openly. No more sneaking around. No more pretending we barely know each other. I can't wait, Melody responded. Watching her waddle around the neighborhood, so proud of her pregnancy, so confident in her marriage. It's almost pathetic. She has no idea what's coming. The recording ended with sounds of physical intimacy that made Rebecca's skin crawl. Dorothy quickly turned off the audio and moved to comfort her. I'm so sorry you had to hear that, Dorothy said gently. But now you know exactly what you're dealing with. Rebecca sat in Dorothy's kitchen chair, both hands pressed protectively over her belly, trying to process the cruelty she'd just witnessed. Her husband wasn't just having an affair. He was systematically planning to destroy her financial security while mocking her pregnancy and maternal instincts. How did you get such clear audio? Directional microphones are remarkably sophisticated these days. I invested in professional-grade equipment after my experience with Harold. Dorothy poured Rebecca a glass of water. The question now is what you want to do with this information. Rebecca's daughter kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to her mother's stress hormones. The movement reminded her that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her child's future. I want copies of everything: photos, audio files, timestamps, documentation of every piece of evidence you've gathered. Of course, but Rebecca, you need to be strategic about how you use this information. Men like Jonathan have expensive lawyers and unlimited resources for fighting dirty. Then I need to fight smarter, not dirtier. Rebecca stood carefully, her hand pressed against her lower back. I'm meeting with a divorce attorney this afternoon, Grace Mitchell. She specializes in high-net-worth cases. Dorothy's eyes lit up with approval. Grace Mitchell has an excellent reputation. She represented my friend Eleanor Whitman in her divorce from that pharmaceutical executive. Eleanor walked away with $40 million and full custody of their twins. The number gave Rebecca hope for the first time in days. If Grace Mitchell could secure $40 million for Eleanor Whitman, maybe she could protect Rebecca's future too. Dorothy, why are you helping me like this? You barely know me. Dorothy's expression grew soft with memory. Because 43 years ago, I wish someone had helped me. Harold took almost everything in our divorce because I had no evidence of his affairs, no documentation of our assets, no strategy for protecting myself. She gestured around her kitchen. This house, my security system, my obsession with neighborhood monitoring, it all stems from being blindsided by betrayal. Rebecca understood now why Dorothy had seemed overly involved in everyone else's business. She wasn't being nosy, she was being protective. Thank you, Rebecca said simply, for everything. Just promise me you'll be careful. Jonathan clearly underestimates you, which is an advantage, but men like him can become dangerous when they realize their control is slipping. That afternoon, Rebecca sat in Grace Mitchell's downtown office, surrounded by law degrees and photographs that projected competence and success. Grace listened to Dorothy's audio recordings with the focused attention of a surgeon examining x-rays. This is remarkably damning evidence, Grace said when the recordings finished. Jonathan's own words document his intent to commit marital fraud, his plans to hide assets, and his strategy for minimizing your settlement rights. What are my options? We file for divorce immediately, before the IPO is finalized. We request emergency financial disclosure of all marital assets. We use these recordings to demonstrate his intent to defraud you, which could entitle you to a larger settlement portion. Grace leaned forward. Rebecca, with evidence like this and the timing of your pregnancy, you could be looking at $20 to $30 million in settlement assets, plus substantial child support. The numbers felt surreal. Rebecca had been preparing to fight for survival, but Grace was talking about financial independence beyond anything she'd imagined. What about custody, given his documented dismissal of parental responsibilities and his affair during your pregnancy? I suspect we can negotiate very favorable custody terms. Grace smiled grimly. Men who plan to abandon their families rarely fight hard for parenting time when faced with public exposure. As Rebecca left Grace's office that evening, she realized her life had officially divided into before and after. Before she knew about Jonathan's betrayal and financial scheming, After she understood that her millionaire ex-husband had underestimated her capacity for strategic thinking, tonight she would go home and act like the naive, pregnant wife Jonathan expected her to be. Tomorrow she would begin executing a plan that would secure her daughter's future and her own financial independence. For the first time in months, Rebecca felt powerful instead of powerless, and that feeling was intoxicating. Rebecca spent the next 3 days meticulously documenting everything while maintaining the facade of blissful ignorance that Jonathan expected. She photographed financial statements, copied account numbers, and created a detailed timeline of his suspicious behaviors. Grace Mitchell had provided her with a comprehensive checklist of evidence to gather before filing divorce papers. The hardest part was acting normal during their daily interactions. When Jonathan kissed her goodbye each morning, Rebecca had to resist the urge to confront him about the recordings. When he asked about her day over dinner, she couldn't mention spending hours with divorce attorneys and financial advisors. "You seem distracted lately," Jonathan observed on Thursday evening as they sat in their formal dining room. "Is everything okay with the baby?" "Just tired," Rebecca replied, cutting her salmon carefully. "Doctor, Wells says everything looks perfect. 4 more weeks. I've been thinking about names again." Jonathan reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "What do you think about Sophia?" "It means wisdom in Greek." The irony was devastating. Her cheating husband wanted to name their daughter after the concept of wisdom, while systematically deceiving everyone around him. "Sophia is beautiful," Rebecca agreed, noting how his wedding ring caught the light from their crystal chandelier. "Soon that ring would come off permanently." "I want her to have every advantage in life," Jonathan continued. "The best schools, travel opportunities, exposure to culture and art. She deserves the world." Rebecca wondered if his version of the world would include the half-sister he was planning to conceive with Melody Blackwood after their divorce was finalized. On Friday morning, Dorothy called with urgent news. "Honey, you need to see this immediately. Jonathan made another visit last night, and the conversation was very revealing." Rebecca found Dorothy in her surveillance room, looking grim. "They're accelerating their timeline," Dorothy explained, pulling up the latest audio recording. "Listen to this." Jonathan's voice filled the room with dangerous urgency. "The pregnancy is making her more observant. Yesterday, she asked about our offshore accounts." Rebecca hadn't asked about offshore accounts, but apparently Jonathan was becoming paranoid about her potential awareness of his financial maneuvering. Melody's response chilled Rebecca's blood. "Maybe we should consider a different approach. If she has an accident during delivery, your problems solve themselves naturally." "Melody, don't even joke about that." "Who's joking? Childbirth complications happen all the time, especially with first pregnancies in older women. She's 32. Jonathan, that's considered advanced maternal age." Rebecca pressed her hand protectively over her belly, horrified by the casual way Melody discussed her potential death. Jonathan's voice carried genuine alarm. "I want a divorce, not a funeral. Rebecca doesn't deserve to die because I made mistakes." "Fine, but if she starts asking too many questions about your finances, we might need to be more creative about managing the situation." Dorothy stopped the recording and studied Rebecca's pale face with concern. "Honey, I think it's time to consider your physical safety along with your financial protection." Rebecca felt their daughter kicking frantically, as if sensing her mother's terror. "She was talking about me having an accident during childbirth." "I heard," and while Jonathan seemed uncomfortable with that suggestion, Melody clearly has no moral boundaries. Rebecca called Grace Mitchell immediately. "Grace, I need to file for divorce today. Not next week, not after more evidence gathering. Today." "What's happened?" Rebecca explained Melody's comments about childbirth accidents and Jonathan's increasing paranoia about her financial awareness. "We're filing emergency papers within the hour," Grace said with professional calm. "I'm also recommending you request a restraining order against Melody Blackwood. Threats against pregnant women, even implicit ones, are taken very seriously by family courts." That afternoon, Rebecca sat in Grace's office signing documents that would officially end her marriage and begin the process of securing her future. Each signature felt like a small victory against the men who had tried to manipulate and deceive her. "What happens when Jonathan receives these papers?" Rebecca asked. "He'll be served at his office tomorrow morning. The divorce petition includes emergency asset freezing, which means he cannot move money or sell property without court approval. Grace smiled with satisfaction. He'll also receive the restraining order petition against his girlfriend, along with copies of all the audio evidence supporting your claims. Will he know the evidence came from Dorothy? The petition simply states that the evidence was obtained through legal neighborhood surveillance. Dorothy's identity is protected as a concerned citizen documenting suspicious activities. Rebecca felt a mixture of terror and excitement as she imagined Jonathan's reaction to being served. For months, he'd been controlling the narrative of their relationship, making her question her own perceptions while planning her financial destruction. Tomorrow, she would control the narrative. That evening, she prepared Jonathan's favorite dinner and served it in their formal dining room with candles and wine. She wanted their last meal as a married couple to be memorable. "This is lovely," Jonathan said, clearly pleased by the romantic gesture. "What's the occasion?" "I wanted to thank you," Rebecca said carefully, "for everything you've taught me about relationships and trust and the importance of protecting yourself." Jonathan's smile faltered slightly. "That's an odd way to phrase gratitude." "Is it?" Rebecca sipped her sparkling water while studying his face. "I've learned so much about marriage in the past few months, about loyalty and honesty, and the kinds of choices people make when they think nobody's watching." Something in her tone made Jonathan set down his fork. "Rebecca, you're talking strangely. Are you feeling all right?" "I feel clearer than I have in months." Rebecca smiled serenely. "Tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day." Jonathan stared at her across their elegant dining table, and for the first time in their relationship, Rebecca could see uncertainty in his eyes. The balance of power was already shifting, and he could sense it even if he couldn't identify the source of his discomfort. After dinner, they went through their normal evening routine one last time. Jonathan reviewed financial documents in his home office, while Rebecca folded baby clothes in the nursery. But everything felt different now that she knew their marriage was officially ending. As she arranged tiny pink outfits in carefully organized drawers, Rebecca whispered to her unborn daughter, "Tomorrow, Daddy's going to learn that Mommy is much smarter than he thought, and we're going to be just fine on our own." For the first time since discovering Jonathan's affair, Rebecca fell asleep easily. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and conflict, but tonight she rested in the knowledge that she had finally taken control of her own story. The revenge would be legal, the justice would be financial, and the outcome would secure her daughter's future in ways Jonathan never imagined possible. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made everything feel possible. Rebecca woke before Jonathan, positioning herself in the kitchen where she could watch Melody's house while preparing breakfast. Today was the day everything would change, and she wanted to witness every moment. At 8 a.m. sharp, a process server in a dark suit walked up their front steps. Rebecca answered the door before he could ring the bell. "Mrs. Sterling, I have documents for your husband. He's upstairs getting ready for work. I'll get him." Rebecca climbed the stairs slowly, savoring these final moments of Jonathan's ignorance. She found him in their walk-in closet, adjusting his tie and humming contentedly. "Honey, there's someone here to see you. He has some papers that need your signature." Jonathan frowned but followed her downstairs. The process server waited professionally in their foyer. "Jonathan Sterling." "Yes. You're being served with divorce papers and a request for emergency asset protection. You have 30 days to respond through legal counsel." Rebecca watched Jonathan's face transform from confusion to shock to fury as he scanned the legal documents. His hands actually trembled as he read Grace Mitchell's carefully crafted petition detailing his affair, his financial manipulation, and the recordings that proved his intent to defraud her. "Rebecca, what the hell is this?" "It's me protecting our daughter's future," she replied calmly. "And my own?" Jonathan's professional composure cracked completely. "You can't be serious. We're having a baby in 4 weeks, which makes your behavior even more despicable." Rebecca moved to the kitchen island, creating physical distance between them. "I know about Melody. Jonathan, I know about your offshore accounts, your IPO strategy, and your plan to minimize my settlement rights. You don't understand what you're doing. These papers could ruin everything I've worked for." "Good!" The single word hit him like a physical blow. For the first time in their relationship, Rebecca had responded to his manipulation with complete indifference to his concerns. Jonathan's phone buzzed with an incoming call from his attorney, who had obviously been alerted to the legal action. While he paced the kitchen having a heated conversation about damage control, Rebecca watched Melody's house through their window. At 9:15 a.m., another process server appeared at Melody's door. Rebecca couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see Melody's shock and anger as she received her restraining order petition and copies of the audio recordings that documented her threats. Within minutes, Melody was storming across the street toward the Sterling house, still clutching her legal papers. Rebecca opened the front door before Melody could ring the bell. "You vindictive bitch," Melody shouted, her perfect composure finally cracking. "How dare you spy on us? How dare you threaten my life during childbirth?" Rebecca replied with deadly calm. Jonathan appeared behind her, his own phone call finished. "Melody, you need to leave immediately." "Leave Jonathan. She's trying to destroy both of us. She has every right to protect herself. We made mistakes, and now we're facing consequences." Rebecca was almost impressed by Jonathan's ability to reframe months of systematic deception as simple mistakes. Even while being served with divorce papers, he couldn't acknowledge the full scope of his betrayal. "Mistakes?" Melody turned her fury on Jonathan. "You told me she was a naive housewife who would never figure out anything. You said she was too focused on playing mommy to notice financial details." "Melody, stop talking." Jonathan's voice carried genuine panic now, but Melody was too angry to be strategic. "I gave up a relationship with a man who actually wanted to marry me because you promised we'd be together after you divorced the pregnant cow." Rebecca felt her daughter kick hard against her ribs, responding to her elevated stress hormones. But instead of feeling hurt by Melody's insults, she felt oddly grateful. Every cruel word Melody spoke would strengthen her position in divorce court. "Miss Blackwood," Rebecca said quietly, "you're violating the restraining order by being on my property. I suggest you return home before I call the police." "This isn't over," Melody hissed, but she retreated toward the street. Jonathan watched his mistress storm away, then turned to face his wife with the expression of a man whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed. "Rebecca, we need to talk about this rationally. Think about our daughter." "I am thinking about our daughter. That's why I'm ensuring she has financial security and a mother who won't tolerate narcissistic abuse." "Narcissistic abuse?" Jonathan's voice cracked with disbelief. "Is that what you think this is?" "I know that's what this is. You've spent months making me question my own perceptions while systematically planning to betray me financially." Rebecca moved toward the staircase. "I'm going to pack some clothes. My attorney advised me to stay elsewhere while the asset protection order is processed." "Where are you going?" "Somewhere safe." Rebecca paused on the bottom step. "Oh, and Jonathan, your IPO timeline just became irrelevant. All marital assets are frozen until the court determines fair distribution." She climbed the stairs slowly, leaving her millionaire ex-husband standing alone in the foyer of their soon-to-be former home. Behind her, she could hear him making frantic phone calls to lawyers and accountants and business partners, trying to minimize the damage to his carefully planned financial future. In their bedroom, Rebecca packed a suitcase with the efficiency of someone who had been mentally preparing for this moment for weeks. Maternity clothes, important documents, ultrasound photos, and the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother before she'd married Jonathan. As she folded clothes, Rebecca could hear Jonathan's voice rising with frustration as he realized how thoroughly her legal team had protected her interests. Grace Mitchell had frozen accounts he'd thought were hidden, documented assets he'd assumed were secret, and created a paper trail that would make his planned financial maneuvering impossible. Dorothy appeared at the bedroom door, having let herself in through the kitchen entrance. "How are you feeling, honey?" "Like I'm finally taking control of my life." Rebecca closed her suitcase and faced the woman who had become her unlikely protector. "Thank you for everything you've done for me. Where will you stay?" Grace arranged a furnished apartment downtown, close to her office and the hospital where I'll deliver. Rebecca picked up her suitcase, surprised by how light it felt. "Funny how little you actually need when you're starting over." Jonathan appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with anger and desperation. "Rebecca, you cannot seriously be walking away from our marriage over this." "I'm walking away from your lies, your financial scheming, and your complete disregard for our family." Rebecca moved toward the door, forcing him to step aside. "The marriage ended months ago when you decided Melody Blackwood was more important than your pregnant wife." "I never said she was more important. You just never said I was important at all." Rebecca walked out of their bedroom, down the stairs she'd climbed as an excited newlywed 6 years ago, and through the front door into her new life. Behind her, she could hear Jonathan pleading with Dorothy to make her see reason, as if the elderly woman had any influence over Rebecca's perfectly logical decision to protect herself. Dorothy followed her to the black sedan Grace Mitchell had sent to transport her to safety. "Call me if you need anything," Dorothy said, pressing a small device into Rebecca's hand. "Emergency panic button connected directly to my security system. If Jonathan or Melody try to contact you inappropriately, press it and I'll have police there within minutes." As the car pulled away from Meadowbrook Estates, Rebecca looked back at the house where she'd spent 6 years trying to be the perfect wife to an imperfect man. The building looked smaller now, less impressive, like a movie set after the cameras stopped rolling. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. "Please don't do this to us." Rebecca deleted the message without responding. There was no us anymore. There was only her daughter, and a future built on truth instead of deception. For the first time in months, Rebecca felt genuinely excited about tomorrow. The furnished apartment Grace Mitchell had arranged was a revelation in simplicity. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen, and a living room with enough space for the bassinet that would arrive next week. After months of living in Jonathan's showcase mansion, the modest space felt like freedom. Rebecca spent her first night away from her marriage sleeping better than she had in weeks. No anxiety about mysterious phone calls, no pretending not to notice unfamiliar perfume, no walking on eggshells around a man whose every word had become a potential lie. On Monday morning, Grace called with updates about the legal proceedings. Jonathan's attorney is pushing for mediation, which suggests they want to settle quickly and quietly. Grace explained. His business partners are concerned about negative publicity affecting the IPO. "What does that mean for me?" "It means we have significant leverage. Men like Jonathan hate public exposure of their private failures." Grace's voice carried satisfaction. "I suspect we'll receive a settlement offer within the week that's very favorable to your interests." Rebecca was organizing baby clothes in her new bedroom when Dorothy called Tuesday afternoon. "Honey, I have some interesting news about the neighborhood reaction to recent events." "Oh, well, it seems that Melody Blackwood's behavior has attracted quite a bit of attention from other residents. Several people have come forward with their own observations about her activities." Rebecca settled into the apartment's single armchair. "What kind of observations?" "Margaret Thornfield saw her going through your garbage on Tuesday mornings. Paul Rodriguez noticed her taking photographs of your house from different angles. Linda Chang observed her timing her daily walks to coincide with Jonathan's departure schedule. The systematic stalking behavior was both creepy and legally relevant. Are people willing to provide statements? That's why I'm calling. I'm organizing a special HOA meeting for Thursday evening to address ongoing security concerns in our neighborhood. These behaviors affect everyone's safety and property values." Rebecca understood the subtext. Dorothy was creating an opportunity for the entire community to hear evidence about Melody and Jonathan's affair in a quasi-official setting that would make the information more credible and widespread. "Will Jonathan attend?" HOA meetings are mandatory for all homeowners. Failure to attend results in fines and potential legal action for violation of community guidelines. Wednesday evening, Rebecca's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Hello. Rebecca, it's Thomas Sterling." Jonathan's father's voice was formal and controlled. "I think we should meet." Rebecca had always liked Thomas, who had treated her with kindness and respect throughout her marriage to his son, but she was cautious about family loyalties during divorce proceedings. "Mr. Sterling, I'm not sure that's appropriate while legal matters are pending. Please, one conversation. There are things you should know about our family's financial structure that might affect your daughter's future." The mention of her daughter's interest convinced her. They agreed to meet at a neutral location downtown the following afternoon. Thursday arrived with unseasonable warmth that made everything feel charged with possibility. Rebecca dressed carefully for her meeting with Thomas, choosing a professional maternity dress that projected competence rather than victimhood. She found Jonathan's father waiting in a quiet corner booth at an upscale restaurant, looking older than his 71 years. Thomas Sterling had built his wealth in real estate development, creating the foundation that allowed Jonathan to pursue his tech ventures. "You look well," Thomas said as she joined him. "How are you feeling physically?" "Strong, ready to meet my daughter in a few weeks." Thomas nodded approvingly. "I wanted to apologize for my son's behavior and explain some financial complications you may not be aware of." Rebecca listened as Thomas outlined a complex trust structure that controlled significant family assets. Jonathan had access to substantial funds, but he didn't own them outright. The trust was designed to protect family wealth across generations, with specific provisions about divorce and infidelity. If Jonathan's affair becomes public knowledge, the trust board has grounds to restrict his access to family money. Thomas explained, he could lose millions in trust distributions that he's been counting on for his personal ventures. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand that Jonathan's financial posturing may be less impressive than it appears, and because I think you deserve to know what resources are actually available for your daughter's support." Thomas reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick legal document. "This is a trust amendment I'm proposing to establish a separate fund for my granddaughter's education, health care, and general welfare. It would be completely independent of any divorce settlement between you and Jonathan." Rebecca scanned the document, noting the substantial dollar amounts designated for her daughter's future. "This is very generous. It's practical. Children shouldn't suffer for their parents' poor choices." Thomas met her eyes directly. "I want you to know that regardless of what happens between you and Jonathan, you and your daughter will always be part of our family." That evening, Rebecca returned to Meadowbrook Estates for Dorothy's HOA meeting. She parked across from her former home, noting that Jonathan's Tesla wasn't in the driveway. He was apparently avoiding the neighborhood gathering. The community center was packed with residents who rarely attended monthly meetings. Dorothy had clearly generated significant interest in her security concerns agenda item. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dorothy began with the authority of someone who had run these meetings for over a decade, "we're here tonight to address ongoing activities that threaten our community's safety and property values." She began with a PowerPoint presentation about general neighborhood security, then transitioned to specific incidents that had occurred over the past 4 months. Without naming Jonathan or Melody directly, Dorothy presented a timeline of suspicious activities, property violations, and behaviors that violated HOA regulations. The photographs were damning: cars parked improperly, garbage collection violations, noise complaints, and what Dorothy diplomatically referred to as activities inappropriate for family-oriented communities. When Dorothy played selected audio recordings of people discussing plans to manage situations and make problems disappear naturally, the room fell completely silent. She had edited the recordings to remove identifying voices, but everyone understood what they were hearing. This type of behavior creates liability issues for all property owners. Dorothy concluded, when residents engage in stalking, harassment, or threats against pregnant neighbors, it affects our community's reputation and potentially our insurance rates. Margaret Thornfield raised her hand. "Are we talking about specific residents?" "I'm talking about patterns of behavior that violate our community standards," Dorothy replied diplomatically. "Individual violations will be addressed through appropriate legal channels." Paul Rodriguez spoke up next. "I've noticed unusual activity at the Blackwood property. Late-night visitors, parking violations, and what appeared to be surveillance behavior directed at neighboring homes." Other residents began sharing their own observations. Linda Chang described Melody's garbage inspection activities. Robert Kim mentioned noise complaints about loud arguments and intimate conversations conducted in outdoor spaces. By the time the meeting ended, it was clear that Melody Blackwood had alienated the entire neighborhood and that Jonathan Sterling's reputation as a respected community member was permanently damaged. Rebecca slipped out during the final discussions, but not before Dorothy caught her eye and nodded with satisfaction. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict, and it favored the pregnant woman over the cheating husband and his predatory girlfriend. Friday morning brought the settlement offer Grace Mitchell had predicted. Jonathan was proposing to give Rebecca $12 million. The house, and generous child support in exchange for a quick divorce and non-disclosure agreement about their marriage's end. It's a good starting offer, Grace admitted, but I think we can do better. His eagerness to settle suggests he's more vulnerable than he wants to admit. Rebecca thought about Thomas Sterling's revelations about trust fund restrictions and the neighborhood's public rejection of Jonathan's behavior. Her millionaire ex-husband was discovering that money couldn't buy back respect or control narratives once the truth was revealed. Counter with 18 million, no non-disclosure agreement, and I keep all rights to discuss my experiences publicly. Rebecca instructed, you want to maintain the right to tell your story. I want other women to know that financial independence is possible, even when their husbands try to destroy them. Rebecca felt her daughter kicking with what seemed like approval. Jonathan spent months making me feel powerless. I want women in similar situations to know they have options. As Grace prepared the counteroffer, Rebecca realized that her divorce had become about more than just ending a bad marriage. It had become about transforming her experience of betrayal into a source of strength that could benefit other women facing similar situations. For the first time since discovering Jonathan's affair, Rebecca felt genuinely proud of the person she was becoming. Jonathan's response to Rebecca's counteroffer arrived Monday morning in the form of legal threats rather than negotiation. His attorney accused her of extortion, claiming the audio recordings were obtained illegally and couldn't be used in court proceedings. Grace Mitchell scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss their strategy. Jonathan's legal team is obviously desperate if they're questioning the admissibility of evidence obtained through lawful neighborhood surveillance. Grace explained as they sat in her downtown office, but we need to be prepared for an aggressive fight. What does that mean practically? It means they'll try to paint you as unstable, vindictive, and motivated by greed rather than genuine concern for your daughter's welfare. Grace pulled out a thick folder. They're already gathering character witnesses to testify about Jonathan's reputation as a devoted husband and successful businessman. Rebecca felt her daughter kicking frantically, responding to her elevated stress levels. Can they really make people believe I'm the problem here? They can try. That's why we need to be strategic about how we present your case. Grace opened the folder, revealing photographs and documents Rebecca hadn't seen before. I've been conducting my own investigation into Jonathan's business practices and personal behavior. The first document showed financial records from Jonathan's company, indicating several previous harassment complaints from female employees that had been settled with non-disclosure agreements. Your husband has a pattern of inappropriate relationships with women in vulnerable positions, Grace explained. 3 different employees, 2 contractors, and now a neighbor who was going through a difficult divorce when he targeted her. Rebecca studied the timeline Grace had created, seeing clear patterns of predatory behavior that extended far beyond her marriage. He specifically chooses women who need his help or protection? Exactly. Women facing financial stress, career challenges, or personal crises. He offers support, creates dependency, then exploits the relationship for his own gratification. The next set of documents detailed Jonathan's financial maneuvering over the past year. Shell companies, offshore accounts, and investment strategies designed to hide marital assets from divorce proceedings. He's been planning to leave you for at least 12 months. Grace continued. These financial moves began long before you became pregnant, which suggests the affair with Melody was part of a larger exit strategy. Rebecca felt a strange sense of relief. The betrayal hadn't been a spontaneous mistake or a reaction to pregnancy stress. It had been a calculated business decision, which somehow made it less personal and more manageable emotionally. What about Thomas Sterling's trust information? That's our strongest leverage. If Jonathan's affair becomes public knowledge during the trust's annual review, he could lose access to $50 million in family money. Grace smiled grimly. His settlement offer will improve dramatically once he realizes we understand the full scope of his financial exposure. Tuesday brought unexpected complications in the form of a hospital visit. Rebecca woke with severe abdominal pain and contractions that sent her to the emergency room at 36 weeks pregnant. It's stress-related. Doctor, Patricia Wells explained after examining her. Your blood pressure is elevated, and your body is responding to emotional trauma by preparing for early labor. Is the baby okay? She's fine, but we need to manage your stress levels immediately. Premature labor at 36 weeks isn't life-threatening, but it's not ideal for her development. Doctor, Wells sat down beside the hospital bed. Rebecca, I need to ask if you're safe in your current living situation. Rebecca explained her separation from Jonathan and the ongoing divorce proceedings. Doctor, Wells listened with the expression of someone who had seen similar situations before. I'm prescribing complete bed rest for the next week. No legal meetings, no stressful conversations, no activities that elevate your heart rate. Doctor, Wells made notes in Rebecca's chart. I'm also recommending that your attorney file for expedited proceedings based on medical necessity. Wednesday afternoon, while Rebecca rested in her apartment following doctor's orders, Grace Mitchell delivered the news that Jonathan's legal strategy had backfired spectacularly. His attorney's aggressive tactics drew attention from the family court judge, who ordered an expedited review of all evidence. Grace explained during a brief phone call. The judge was particularly concerned about the audio recordings, suggesting threats against a pregnant woman. What does that mean? It means we have a court date next Friday, and Jonathan has 1 week to explain his financial maneuvering, his affair, and his girlfriend's comments about childbirth accidents. Grace's voice carried deep satisfaction. His attempt to intimidate you legally has resulted in exactly the kind of public exposure he was trying to avoid. Thursday brought visitors to Rebecca's apartment. Dorothy arrived with homemade soup and updates about neighborhood developments. Melody Blackwood moved out yesterday. Dorothy reported while arranging flowers in Rebecca's kitchen. U-Haul truck, angry phone conversations with someone who sounded like a lawyer, and several boxes labeled evidence, which she handled very carefully. Evidence. I suspect she kept documentation of her relationship with Jonathan as insurance against exactly this kind of situation. Dorothy settled into the apartment's single armchair. Smart women always keep proof of powerful men's promises. That evening, Thomas Sterling called to check on Rebecca's health and provide updates about family reactions to the legal proceedings. The trust board met yesterday, he reported. They're very concerned about negative publicity affecting our family's business reputation. What did they decide? They're restricting Jonathan's access to discretionary funds until the divorce is resolved and his business judgment improves. Thomas paused. They also approved my proposal for your daughter's education trust. $5 million, completely independent of any settlement between you and Jonathan. Rebecca pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her daughter's strong kicks in response to the conversation. Thank you. This means she'll have opportunities regardless of how the divorce proceeds. She deserves the best possible future, and so do you. Friday morning arrived with a phone call from Grace that changed everything. Jonathan wants to settle immediately, Grace announced without preamble. $22 million. The house, full custody, with minimal visitation rights, and no restrictions on your ability to discuss your marriage publicly. The number was higher than Rebecca's most optimistic expectations. Why the sudden generosity? Because his girlfriend apparently kept very detailed records of their relationship, including recordings of their conversations about you and financial plans for after your divorce. Grace chuckled. It seems Melody Blackwood was smarter than Jonathan realized. She's threatening to release everything publicly unless he pays her $2 million for her emotional distress. Rebecca realized that Melody's documentation could corroborate all of Dorothy's surveillance evidence while providing additional details about Jonathan's financial scheming and personal cruelty. He's being blackmailed by his own mistress. Essentially, yes. And since he can't risk public exposure of his affair affecting his business deals and family trust access, he's desperate to settle all potential legal problems immediately. That afternoon, Rebecca signed divorce papers that officially ended her marriage while securing her financial independence beyond anything she had imagined possible when she first heard Jonathan's voice through the baby monitor. As she walked out of the courthouse, officially divorced and $22 million wealthier, Rebecca reflected on the journey from betrayed wife to empowered single mother. The transformation had taken less than 6 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime of personal growth compressed into legal proceedings. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. Proud of you, honey. Come home when you're ready. The neighborhood is looking forward to welcoming you back. For the first time in months, Rebecca smiled thinking about returning to Meadowbrook Estates. But this time, she would be returning as the owner of her own home, the architect of her own future, and the mother of a daughter who would grow up understanding that women could be both vulnerable and powerful at the same time. Rebecca went into labor on the Tuesday following her divorce finalization, 3 weeks before her official due date, but right on schedule according to her body's timeline. The contractions started at dawn while she was reviewing financial documents in her apartment, and by noon she was in the delivery room at Mercy General Hospital. Grace Mitchell arrived first. Having been designated as Rebecca's emergency contact and healthcare proxy, Dorothy appeared an hour later, carrying a hospital bag packed with everything Rebecca hadn't thought to bring in her rush to get medical attention. "Any word from Jonathan?" Grace asked as they waited in the hospital corridor. "I texted him that I was in labor," Rebecca replied between contractions. "He responded with congratulations and said he'd visit after the baby arrived." Dorothy shook her head with disgust. Missing his own daughter's birth to avoid dealing with emotions? That man is truly something special. "Doctor," Patricia Wells appeared in scrubs, looking professional and reassuring. "Rebecca, everything looks perfect. Are you ready to meet your daughter?" 6 hours later, Sophia Grace Sterling made her entrance into the world weighing 6 pounds, 4 ounces, and announcing her arrival with lung capacity that impressed the entire medical staff. Rebecca held her daughter for the first time, while Dorothy wiped tears from her eyes and Grace documented everything with photographs for the baby book Rebecca had been preparing. "She's absolutely perfect," Dorothy whispered, gently touching Sophia's tiny hand. "Look at those fingers. She's going to be an artist or a musician or maybe a surgeon. She's going to be whatever she wants to be," Rebecca said, studying her daughter's face and seeing her own features reflected back. "No one will ever make her feel like she has to be small or quiet or grateful for less than she deserves." Thomas Sterling arrived that evening, carrying flowers and wearing the expression of a man who understood that family loyalty sometimes required choosing sides. "She's beautiful," he said, accepting the privilege of holding his granddaughter. "She has your eyes and my late wife's nose." "Any word from Jonathan?" Rebecca asked. "He's in San Francisco, supposedly handling IPO details that couldn't be delayed." Thomas's tone suggested his opinion of his son's priorities. "He sent his congratulations and said he'd visit when his business obligations permitted." Rebecca felt a surprising absence of hurt at Jonathan's choice to prioritize work over his daughter's birth. 6 months ago, his dismissal would have devastated her. Now it simply confirmed that she'd made the right decision about ending their marriage. "Thomas, I want you to know that regardless of what happens between Jonathan and me, you'll always be part of Sophia's life. She deserves to know her grandfather." "Thank you. That means everything to me." Thomas adjusted the tiny pink hat Dorothy had brought. "I've been thinking about legacy lately, about what we leave behind versus what we actually accomplish." Over the next few days, Rebecca's hospital room became a gathering place for the people who had supported her through the divorce proceedings. Dorothy brought homemade meals and took hundreds of photographs. Grace handled media inquiries from business reporters interested in the Sterling divorce story. Thomas visited daily, bringing updates about Sophia's trust fund and sharing family stories Rebecca had never heard. But the most significant conversation came on Thursday, when Melody Blackwood appeared unexpectedly at Rebecca's hospital room door. "I hope I'm not intruding," Melody said, looking dramatically different from the confident woman who had delivered cookies months earlier. Her hair was shorter, her makeup minimal, and her designer clothes replaced with jeans and a simple sweater. "What do you want?" Rebecca asked, instinctively holding Sophia closer. "To apologize, and to give you something that belongs to you." Melody pulled a manila envelope from her purse and set it on the bedside table. "Jonathan's love letters to me, financial documents showing how he planned to hide money from you, and recordings of conversations where he said things about you that no husband should ever say about his wife." Rebecca stared at the envelope without touching it. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I realized that Jonathan didn't just betray you. He used both of us." Melody sat in the visitor's chair, looking exhausted. "He promised me marriage after your divorce, but I found out this week that he's been having another affair with someone from his office, a 24-year-old marketing assistant." The revelation should have been shocking, but Rebecca felt only grim satisfaction at having her suspicions about Jonathan's character confirmed. "I'm sorry he lied to you too," Rebecca said, meaning it. "I deserve what I got for participating in his deception. You didn't deserve any of it." Melody gestured toward Sophia. "She's beautiful." I hope she grows up knowing her mother is stronger than any man who tries to diminish her. After Melody left, Rebecca opened the envelope and found documentation that confirmed everything she'd suspected about Jonathan's character and more. Love letters describing his plans for their future together, financial spreadsheets outlining asset hiding strategies, and audio recordings of him describing Rebecca as convenient and manageable and too trusting to be a real threat. But rather than feeling hurt by his cruelty, Rebecca felt empowered by finally understanding the complete scope of his deception. She had been married to a man who viewed relationships as business transactions and women as resources to be managed rather than partners to be respected. Friday brought Jonathan's first visit to meet his daughter. He arrived carrying an expensive flower arrangement and wearing the charming smile that had once made Rebecca's heart race. "She's incredible," he said, accepting Sophia carefully as if she were made of glass. "I'm sorry I missed the delivery. Business emergencies couldn't be postponed." "I understand," Rebecca replied, noting how easily the lie rolled off his tongue. Jonathan held his daughter for exactly 12 minutes, posed for several photographs that would presumably be useful for social media purposes, then returned her to Rebecca with obvious relief. "I've been thinking about custody arrangements," he said, settling into the visitor's chair. "Maybe something flexible that accommodates both our schedules." Rebecca studied his face, seeing the same calculation that had characterized every interaction since she discovered his affair. "What did you have in mind? Weekend visits when I'm in town, holidays we can negotiate yearly, and regular video calls to maintain connection." Jonathan smiled as if he were offering something generous rather than minimal involvement in his daughter's life. "That sounds reasonable," Rebecca agreed, privately noting that his proposed schedule would require approximately 40 hours of parenting per year. After Jonathan left, Dorothy settled into the chair he'd vacated and shook her head with amazement. "That man just negotiated himself out of a relationship with his own daughter," Dorothy observed. 40 hours a year of required fatherhood, and he thinks he's being generous. "It's exactly what I expected," Rebecca replied, "and exactly what's best for Sophia. She deserves better than a father who views her as an obligation rather than a blessing." That evening, as Rebecca prepared to take her daughter home to their apartment, she reflected on the extraordinary 6 months that had transformed her from naive housewife to financially independent single mother. The betrayal that had initially devastated her had actually been the catalyst for discovering her own strength, building genuine friendships, and securing her daughter's future in ways that would have been impossible within her marriage. As she packed Sophia's hospital belongings, Rebecca realized that Jonathan's affair had been the best thing that ever happened to her, even though it had been the most painful experience she'd ever endured. Tomorrow, she would begin raising her daughter as a woman who understood that love required respect, that financial independence was essential for personal freedom, and that women supporting women could overcome almost any obstacle men created. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt genuinely excited about her future. 6 months after Sophia's birth, Rebecca stood in the kitchen of her Meadowbrook Estates home, watching her daughter discover the fascinating properties of strained carrots while preparing for the dinner party that would celebrate the launch of her consulting business. The house felt completely different now that it truly belonged to her. She'd redecorated with warm colors and comfortable furniture that reflected her personality rather than Jonathan's sterile aesthetic preferences. Family photographs covered the mantel, baby toys scattered across the living room floor, and the home office had been converted into a proper nursery where Sophia could play while Rebecca worked. Sterling Consulting Solutions had grown faster than Rebecca had imagined possible. Word spread quickly through professional networks about her expertise in marketing strategy and crisis management, particularly among women-owned businesses and companies dealing with reputation challenges. Her first major client had been a tech startup whose female CEO was facing gender discrimination lawsuits. Rebecca's background in both marketing and surviving narcissistic abuse made her uniquely qualified to help women navigate professional challenges while protecting their personal interests. "Mama," Sophia babbled from her high chair, waving a carrot-covered spoon with the enthusiasm of someone discovering artistic expression. "That's right, sweetheart. You're quite the artist." Rebecca wiped orange puree from her daughter's cheek, marveling at how much joy she found in these simple daily moments. The doorbell rang at 6 p.m. sharp. Dorothy arrived first, carrying a casserole and wearing a navy dress that made her look elegant rather than matronly. "How's my honorary granddaughter?" Dorothy cooed, immediately gravitating toward Sophia's high chair. "Redecorating the kitchen with vegetables," Rebecca replied, grateful for Dorothy's consistent presence in their lives. The older woman had become family in ways that transcended neighborhood boundaries. Grace Mitchell arrived next, followed by Thomas Sterling, who had maintained his promise to remain actively involved in Sophia's life despite the complicated relationship with his son. "She's gotten so big," Thomas marveled, accepting Sophia when she reached for him with sticky fingers. "And she's definitely inherited the Sterling stubbornness. Let's hope she uses it more constructively than her father did," Rebecca said, serving wine to her guests while keeping sparkling cider for herself since she was still nursing. As they gathered around the dining room table, Rebecca looked at the people who had supported her through the most challenging period of her life and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I want to thank you all for everything you've done for Sophia and me," she began. "6 months ago, I thought my life was ending. Tonight, I realize it was just beginning." Dorothy raised her glass. "To women who refuse to be diminished by men who underestimate them. To financial independence and emotional freedom," Grace added, "to grandchildren who make us better people." Thomas contributed. As they toasted, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She glanced at it quickly, then set the phone aside when she realized it was from Jonathan. "Everything all right?" Grace asked, noticing her expression. "Jonathan wondering if he can take Sophia to some business function next month. Apparently, having an adorable daughter would be good for his image during investor meetings." Dorothy made a sound of disgust. "That man views his own child as a marketing prop." "What did you tell him?" Thomas asked quietly. "Nothing yet, but I'm thinking no. Sophia deserves better than being used as a photo opportunity for a father who sees her once a month." Thomas nodded approvingly. "You're protecting her from learning that love is conditional on usefulness. That's good parenting." After dinner, while Dorothy played with Sophia and Grace reviewed some business contracts Rebecca had received, Thomas pulled her aside for a private conversation. "I have some news about Jonathan that you should know," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Is he all right?" "Physically, yes, but his IPO was delayed indefinitely due to the harassment complaints from former employees becoming public knowledge." Thomas sat heavily in Rebecca's comfortable armchair. Turns out that Melody Blackwood wasn't the only woman who kept documentation of inappropriate relationships. Rebecca felt no satisfaction at Jonathan's professional troubles, only sadness that his pattern of exploiting women had finally caught up with him in ways that might actually force accountability. What about his other relationships? The marketing assistant broke up with him when she realized he was still married when their affair began. She's considering legal action for sexual harassment. Thomas looked older than his 71 years. "I'm afraid my son has created a reputation that will follow him for years to come." "I'm sorry, Thomas. This must be difficult for you." "It's embarrassing more than difficult. I raised him to respect women and honor commitments, but somewhere along the way he decided that rules applied to other people." Thomas gestured toward Sophia, who was giggling at Dorothy's peekaboo game. "At least his daughter will grow up with better role models." Later that evening, after her guests had left and Sophia was sleeping peacefully in her crib, Rebecca sat in her home office reviewing client proposals and feeling genuinely excited about her professional future. Sterling Consulting Solutions had 3 new contracts starting next month, including a major project with a women's advocacy organization that needed help managing public relations during a high-profile discrimination lawsuit. Her divorce settlement of $22 million meant she could be selective about clients and causes, choosing projects that aligned with her values rather than simply paying bills. Financial independence had given her the freedom to build a career focused on helping other women navigate challenges similar to what she'd experienced. Rebecca's phone buzzed with another message from Jonathan, this one longer and more desperate in tone. "Rebecca, I know I made mistakes during our marriage, but I want to be a better father to Sophia. Can we please discuss increasing my visitation time? I'm ready to prioritize family over business." She stared at the message for several minutes, considering her response. 6 months ago, she might have been hopeful about Jonathan's claims of wanting to change. Now she understood that his interest in increased visitation probably had more to do with improving his damaged reputation than genuine desire for fatherhood. Instead of responding immediately, Rebecca opened her laptop and began typing a blog post for her business website about recognizing manipulation in professional and personal relationships. Her experiences with narcissistic abuse had taught her valuable lessons about identifying red flags, protecting boundaries, and maintaining self-worth during psychological warfare. If other women could learn from her story, then Jonathan's betrayal would serve a purpose beyond simply ending their marriage. As she wrote, Sophia stirred in her crib with the soft sounds that meant she was dreaming. Rebecca paused to check on her daughter, studying the peaceful face that looked so much like her own. You're going to grow up knowing that you deserve love that doesn't require you to be smaller or quieter or more convenient, Rebecca whispered. And you're going to know that financial independence isn't just about money, it's about having choices. Sophia smiled in her sleep, as if she understood the promise her mother was making. Rebecca returned to her laptop and continued writing, sharing her story with women who might be questioning their own perceptions, doubting their own worth, or wondering if they had options beyond accepting unacceptable treatment from men who claim to love them. Outside her window, the Meadowbrook Estates neighborhood slept peacefully under Dorothy's watchful security cameras. Melody Blackwood's house remained empty, with a for-sale sign that had attracted no serious buyers in the months since her departure. Rebecca's house, by contrast, felt full of life and possibility. Baby equipment in the living room, business files on the kitchen table, photographs of genuine happiness covering every surface, and the sound of a child who would grow up believing that women could be both nurturing and powerful, vulnerable and strong, trusting and wise. As she finished her blog post about transforming betrayal into strength, Rebecca realized that her millionaire ex-husband had actually given her the greatest gift of her life by revealing his true character before their daughter was old enough to be disappointed by his limitations. The divorce settlement had provided financial independence, but more importantly, the experience of surviving narcissistic abuse had taught her that she was capable of protecting herself and her child from people who would diminish them. At midnight, Rebecca finally responded to Jonathan's text with a message that was both kind and clear. Sophia and I are building a life based on consistency, respect, and genuine love. When you're ready to offer those things without conditions or agenda, we can discuss your role in her future. She sent the message and closed her laptop, satisfied that she had responded with the wisdom that came from understanding her own worth. Tomorrow she would wake up in a home she owned, spend the day building a business she loved, and raise a daughter who would never question whether she deserved to be treated with respect and kindness. Sometimes, Rebecca reflected as she prepared for bed, God uses the worst betrayals to deliver us to our best lives. Jonathan's affair had ended her marriage, but it had also begun her transformation into the woman she was always meant to become. As she drifted off to sleep in the master bedroom of her own home, with her daughter sleeping safely in the next room and her future bright with possibility, Rebecca Sterling smiled with the deep contentment that comes from knowing you've survived the worst and created something beautiful from the wreckage. 6 months ago, she had been a naive wife waiting for her cheating husband to come home. Tonight, she was a successful entrepreneur, devoted mother, an empowered woman who understood that the best revenge against men who underestimate women is simply living well, despite their efforts to destroy you. And Rebecca Sterling was living very well indeed. If Rebecca's story inspired you, imagine how many other women need to hear this message right now. Someone in your life might be questioning their own relationship, doubting their instincts, or feeling trapped by financial dependence. Share this story with them. Hit that share button and send it to the women in your life who need to know that they have options, that they're stronger than they realize, and that financial independence is possible even in the darkest moments. If you believe women should support women, if you think stories like Rebecca's deserve to be heard, then smash that like button. Your engagement helps these empowering stories reach more people who desperately need to hear them. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Rebecca's situation? Have you ever had an experience with narcissistic manipulation? Your story might help someone else recognize the warning signs. And if you want more stories about women who refuse to be victims, who turn their pain into power, and who prove that the best revenge is living well, then subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because every week, I share real stories about real women who transform their lives against impossible odds. Remember, your story isn't over. Your comeback is always possible, and sometimes the person who tries to destroy you ends up being the catalyst for your greatest transformation. Thank you for listening to Rebecca's incredible journey. I'll see you in the next story, where we'll discover that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's taking action despite the fear. Keep fighting, keep growing, and keep supporting each other. You're stronger than you know.